a vital component here. They are essential to healthy watersheds. The loss of forests affects rivers. As growing communities develop these areas, cattle move to and from water. They trample and compact the earth, and soon cattle paths crisscross the steep slopes. When the seasonal downpours occur, water runs down the hillsides, channeled by the cattle paths. The rains wash away the exposed earth. This is the beginning of erosion. As erosion takes hold, the water cuts deeper and wider every time it rains, washing away the topsoil. Topsoil that took thousands of years to create and will take just as long to replace. The abuse of watersheds is only the first step leading to inevitable disaster. The more topsoil that is lost, the less fertile the land becomes and less vegetation grows. As water drains faster off the eroded slopes, the erosion spreads, feeding on itself in an increasingly destructive cycle. As rainwater pours off eroded watersheds, streams become raging torrents. The topsoil that colors the water is a sure sign of a dying catchment and a dying river. Eroded catchments are causing more rivers to overflow, and as they flash flood, they affect places hundreds of miles away. These rivers overflow regularly now, creating erosion and devastation in the surrounding areas. Once the rains end, the rivers quickly dry out, revealing millions of tons of displaced soil. Many rivers that a few years ago were navigable, flowing throughout the year, are now shallow, silted streams. As rivers are clogged, silt builds up in dams, reducing their water-holding capacity. Agriculture is always affected, especially intensive farming. The cash crops grown in Africa don't originate in these dry areas. They come from more temperate, high rainfall places, and they need water, lots of it. They cannot survive the dry months without irrigation. For some African countries, farming these cash crops is helping pay back development loans to the industrialized world. Crops like corn, wheat, tobacco, beans, tea, coffee, and sugarcane. All these crops have one thing in common. During the dry months, they depend on irrigation. If it stops, they die. These high-yield crops are quick to drain nutrients from the soils. Fertilizers are seldom used here because of the expense. It is cheaper for the developers to move to new land. Once a project becomes unprofitable, they simply abandon it, move on, and leave behind a wasteland. Other ventures are then initiated in unexploited parts. And so it goes on and on. In a few places, the wilderness still flourishes. These are healthy ecosystems with the natural animals and plants still living there. These areas have survived till now because they were effectively protected from man by nature. The custodian of these areas is this small insect, the tsetse fly, carrier of trips or trypanosomiasis, a disease fatal to domestic animals. Though the bite of this small creature is deadly to cattle, wild animals are immune to it. The tsetse fly is seldom fatal to humans, but its presence effectively keeps man out because he cannot enter these areas with domestic stock. Without the tsetse fly here to protect it, much more of Africa's wilderness would have by now been destroyed. The tsetse fly is nature's last line of defense against man, and it has done a better job of protecting the wilderness than all the conservationists that ever lived. The Okavango Delta in Botswana is the tsetse's domain. But now man wants the wilderness, and he has come to fight nature for it. Sponsored by foreign development agencies and supported by local governments, the war begins. Nature is powerless before it. Foreign development agencies spend millions of dollars annually trying to eradicate the tsetse fly. They quite simply want today's tsetse fly areas as replacement land for devastated cattle country. Once the project begins, squadrons of spray planes are stationed at makeshift bases within easy striking distance of the enemy. These planes will deposit tons of lethal poison over the wilderness. Development agencies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the war against the tsetse fly. The money spent has primarily benefited the international chemical companies rather than the local people. Pesticides used against the tsetse are notorious for their effects on fish and insect life, and ultimately, the entire food chain. In Europe and America, men handling these chemicals would be wearing protective clothing and masks. But in those places, most of these chemicals are now banned because of their destructive effect on the environment. The planes are often dangerously overloaded, and so they have dump valves. In the event of any mechanical problem, they simply dump their cargo over the wilderness before landing. Aerial spraying takes place at night when the air is still and the tsetse fly is most vulnerable. Tonight we'll see the end of an irreplaceable part of Africa. For the wilderness, it is the 11th hour. The next day, nothing appears to have been disturbed. But from